Ladies and gentlemen, Gerald Veasley. Gerald Veasley, how you doing today, Gerald?
Chris Maute, I'm doing pretty darn good. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. This is pretty awesome.
And so I introduced Gerald and Simon backstage. Simon, how are you feeling tonight?
Oh yeah, not bad, not bad. I'm glad to be here with Gerald and yourself, of course. Two of my favorite bass players.
Oh, Simon,
too much, too nice. So we talked a little bit backstage, and I tried to tell Gerald, there's too much. We're revealing too much. We need to save the sauce for when we're on camera. So here's a little bit of a background. For those of you that do know who Gerald is, good for you. You're the right kind of people. For those of you that may not, Gerald is an amazing, world-renowned electric jazz bass player. Cut his teeth playing with people such as Grover Washington Jr., Joe Zawinul, who made popular the band Weather Report, who also, I think he cut his teeth playing with Cannonball Adderley. And yes, played with a Philly legend, Gerald Veasley. I'm a little biased because he's also my bass teacher when I was in music school. So Gerald and I have a history, and I'm looking forward to, in the process of poking his brain about music and emotions, waxing nostalgic about the good old days when I was taking bass lessons from him. So welcome, Gerald Veasley. I couldn't be happier to be hosting you on FLAVORTOOTH.
Oh, man. Thank you for that introduction. And speaking of being happy, when we were talking earlier, I kept trying to think of the word that characterized how I thought about you as a student. And it's a word that's overlooked. It just hit me as I walked out the door a couple minutes ago, which is diligent. Like a super intense, intentional, serious student, and being very, very, very diligent. Now, the importance of that is that often when people see us as musicians, they think everything just happens naturally. You grew up on a music farm and you were playing it there with all the potatoes, and then you grew up and then you became, but there's so much work that goes into really being an accomplished musician. And I love that you were so willing to do that, to put that work in, and go beyond what I ever asked you to do.
Gerald, you set a very high benchmark. As a teacher, you also know how to read a student, so you get out of people what you put into them. And as I was mentioning before we went live, you knew exactly what kind of homework assignments to give me. And I kind of, and so I appreciate that. We're going to be touching base on the kind of bass teacher you are kind of throughout this, because as I had mentioned before we went live, this idea, these discussions about music, these explicit discussions about music and emotions reminds me, were born out of my memories of the kinds of bass lessons that you gave, and the kinds of questions you would ask me, and the kinds of answers you would give me when I would ask questions, and how sometimes the bass lesson had very little to do with actually playing electric bass. I think all of those things are important when talking about music, because music and emotions are so intertwined. Now, I want to put a little flag in the sand about the misconception that talent is the writing variable when it comes to the arts, right? Because as you had mentioned, some people think like you grew up on Talent Farm. He's just talented. His talent is what's getting him where he is, or she, or they. And research has shown, so of course I'm going to be peppering this conversation with my understanding of psychology research, because I also teach a course, psychology of music. So that study, there is research that shows that getting those 10,000 hours made popular by Malcolm Gladwell, getting those 10,000 hours in is really going to get you towards expertise. But if you also have talent, in addition to putting in all that hard work, yes, you're going to be a signal above that noise. But keeping in mind that that noise is like the plateau of excellence, right? Getting in those 10,000 hours puts you in this very thin bandwidth of expertise, and only those with talent are a signal beyond that noise. So, to your point, diligence, certain hard work goes into, and I'm sure that you can speak to this. I'm sure you could tell stories about bass lessons when you were in music school and people that inspired you to make you want to wrap your head around what was given to you because you appreciated that this is the information that is going to build you as a musician in one way or another, right?
Yeah.
And my appreciation for you was that it wasn't always about the musicianship, right? It wasn't always about like your technique. What are you doing with your left hand? What are you doing with your right hand? That so rarely came up. Everything else was more ethereal and abstract and fun. Like I said, you get out of people what you put into them, and you were able to read me like a book, man. I'm waxing. I'm sorry if I'm just so I'm fanboying over, my own bass teacher here. So.
Well, it's interesting. You keep bringing up this phrase that you get out of a student what you put in, and the more you're reinforcing it, the more I have to accept that's part of the dynamic between teacher and student. And the other part of that dynamic is, as a teacher, the more you pour back into me, the more I can give back, right? So the fact that you took, you were so earnest about whatever I showed you, it gave me the affirmation to keep going, that we're on a good path. And that you weren't there to just do the bare minimum to get by, but that you were looking for as much as I had to offer. You were ready to receive it. I think that's, for most teachers who really love it, that's the currency. I call it also, we know about those aha moments, right?
Yeah.
So when you see a student's eyes light up and they have an understanding that they didn't understand before, that's currency for a student, for teachers who really love it. Absolutely.
And that's currency that doesn't devalue, right? So one of my wishes is that moments like this very conversation is a reinforcement to you that whatever short-term gains you had as a teacher student relationship, it is now paying dividends, because this is what I've become, right? And I get to come back and have conversations with you about what I've learned. And I still have questions for you about things, right? But now we can talk to each other at a different level. Yeah. This will be nourishment for you, for your inspiration, because, hey, 25 years ago, wow, you gave me I took bass lessons from you.
Well, I'm already inspired by just this short talk so far. This idea of talent versus hard work is something that I'm very passionate about, because especially in institutional places of institutional learning, often students who may not be the most talented in the beginning, they won't get as much attention. They may not be recognized as readily by their peers, get invited to play with other people. And it can be, unfortunately, a setting that doesn't inspire someone to grow as an artist, because a lot of times the student who comes in with very little talent is so humble and so thirsty and excited that they're limitless in terms of what they can learn. They may not have that sort of baseline of knowledge that other students may have, but they have this hunger and this desire. And so what I learned from that experience teaching at UArts was that you can never tell in the beginning where students are going to end up. You can never tell. Good point. You can never tell, not by listening to what they are in the beginning. It's listening to watching the development and watching how hard they're willing to work.
because in that hard work, they might find that weird tweak of inspiration that guides their trajectory. Just it offsets it that 1 degree so that years later they're so much further, right? And you get to watch that. You get to see that, like, oh, they weren't so into whatever melodic minor over dominant, or whatever, like trying, doing a Charlie Parker move, or doing this figure, or whatever inspiration they have, whatever spark you see. That's fascinating, because you're watching their development.
And they're not so mesmerized by how good they are, especially how their peers see them, right? Mm-hmm. Because that can be a trap too. A friend of mine says, on a professional level, is Walter Veasley. He's a wonderful saxophonist, taught at Berkeley for a number of years. He says, if musicians could ever break their addiction to applause, we could go so far. Because applause is great. It's right. It's affirming. It gets you excited, right? Mm-hmm. But often it's a negative reinforcement, right? Because you will do that thing now to chase the applause instead of sometimes doing the thing that's really true to you,
instead of being authentic, right? Now all of a sudden patterns and repetition and tricks are substituting authenticity, right? So I'm with you on that. So I'd like to use this opportunity, if we're going to be talking about education, to bring up that you have a bass boot camp.
Yes.
So could you please tell me and Simon and everybody else about that? Because that is a different, right? This isn't a formal education in that it is at a university or institution. It's an intensive couple week, like it's a boost, and you get your butt kicked with bass.
The reason we call it boot camp is because it's an intensive experience with a lot of hours. We don't intend it to be rigorous musically, although we like to challenge you. But it's more about having a community of bass players who come together with an openness to learning and a willingness to be transformed and inspired in a short amount of time. So I like to think of it as sort of a retreat for bass players to kind of reconnect with the person that they thought could do anything, right? that especially that child that had this sense of awe and wonder about music. We started back in 2002, and it's primarily been a place to bring together folks who are not professionals, folks who maybe have other kinds of pursuits. We've had pilots. In fact, one year we had President Obama's Marine One pilot was our student there. We've had we've had truck drivers, we've had doctors, we've had people from all walks of life who have this common love of the bass. And so what we do is create a zone where people can be encouraged and supported. We have a few mantras that kind of guide our weekend. One is that everyone is a student and everyone is a teacher.
All right.
So what that means is that, and just to tell you a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the program. So it's an intense 3-day program over a weekend. And it's altogether, if you were to take every single class, it would be about 30 hours of instruction and jam sessions. So it is intense. You do have to kind of rest up, take your vitamins to get ready. But we immediately kind of empower students that if you're starting to learn a concept that we're showing you and the person next to you is not quite getting it, you're empowered to show what you're learning. Because one of the best ways to reinforce that you're learning is to teach someone else. So that's one of the important parts of the camp, that everyone is a teacher, everyone is a student. As teachers, we're also students, and we're perpetual lifelong learners. So it's exciting for us to hear things that our students can do that inspire us. So even though it has the name Bass Boot Camp, and even though I guess physically it requires to really stick to itiveness throughout the weekend, it's not a place where anyone is ever shamed for what they don't know or embarrassed for what they don't know, but encouraged in front of all of us to show who you are. Because for me, as we've talked about in a lot of those lessons that you referenced earlier, the bass is really just a vehicle to explore other parts of who you might be, you know, and it's an opportunity to say something or to reconnect with the, you know, the biggest part of yourself, you know. So, you know, that's why we started the bass boot camp as a way to kind of, again, have people reconnect to that part of themselves that's capable of doing anything. And when I say anything, it's not the performative aspect of playing the bass, but of growing in a short period of time. And that's why I love the quote unquote beginner students, because when you and I talked about those aha moments, when you're with a beginning student, they're all aha moments. Yeah.
So I would like to springboard off of your description about the bass boot camp and using the bass as an instrument to get their musicianship together so they can express and be in touch with more of who they are. I'm going to use that to springboard into the topic of our hang today, which is music and emotion.
Yeah.
So I did prep you for this. I sent you a little email saying, be prepared to answer questions like, and so here's one of them, like real quick, for people who have not seen this kind of hang of mine before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be a devil's advocate to the idea that music does evoke emotions because it's just so intuitive. I'm assuming you're going to say yes, but I have arguments against it, not because I want to argue, but because I want to have a deeper understanding of your connection of music and emotions. What is your connection to emotions through music as a performer, as a composer, and so on? So let me just give you an opportunity. You have the floor, Mr. Veasley. Does music evoke emotions? And if so, why?
Fascinating. So I'll start with a personal anecdote or personal story. Is when I was growing up, I loved music, and my connection to music was, it was something just fun to do, and it felt natural to be to play music with my friends and to be in bands. And I actually had decided to go a different route with my life. And my father passed away when I was in college, and I went into this, grieving, this period of really grieving, and felt a numbness and a listlessness. And I actually, during that period when I was at school, I actually put the bass aside. I wasn't playing much at all because I had different aspirations. And the only thing that brought me out of that dark place was listening to music. And I remember specifically listening to a Marvin Gaye album and not looking for anything, but it just happened to be the record that was on. And I could feel myself coming up out of that darkness. And there was a sort of an understanding that music is powerful enough to touch one person, me in that instance. And it also, it convicted me to get on the other side of that process, to say, wow, if music can do that for me, what if I got on the other side of that and made music to touch people and to heal people and to help people? So to say that, to question whether music has an emotional component, I'm so far past that. I would say that it's a necessary part of our healing if we allow it to be. And sometimes it has this ability to explain the inexplicable. Like there are things that we can't contend with words, right? Or with elaborate descriptions. The music just settles it. You know, it hits you like an arrow into a target, and you're just looking at the arrow in the middle of the target. It's like those question about, well, how did it get there? And it's right there, and it's piercing you to the core. So I would love to hear your counter to that, because to me, it's
I'm made of questions right now. So first question is, I'm going to start with the last point that you brought up. And of course, Simon, if you gleaned any fun little nuggets in there, please chime in. Which do you think is is a more direct communicator, Gerald? Music or language, verbal language?
Mm-hmm.
Which do you think between the two?
I don't know if it's an either or choice. I appreciate that question. I think either one can be a tool. So the nice thing about music is that the three of us might hear a song, and without talking about it, it might hit us in a way where all of a sudden, boom, we're connected because of our life experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And words sometimes actually create misunderstandings.
Right.
Although language can be, it can be very helpful, but sometimes it can create mischief, right?
It's my trap now, Joe.
Right, our understanding of a word and the nuance that's in language sometimes can get us into trouble. So I'm not saying that music is superior, but music has this other way of kind of connecting in a way that that intentional language can't.
All right. So, man, you just opened up so many cans of worms. Also, beautiful. I mean, that is just the answer of a pro. I mean, that was fantastic on so many levels.
And the perfect example as well. I just want to say, I realized I was the same person that Marvin Gaye was when I listened to one of his songs.
Wow.
And that was so deep for me as a very young man. I must have been 9 years old or something. I don't know. And it was, it just hit me, as you say, not because of any reason, but because I understood the communication that was being put across to me. And that it made my life go in a completely different way than it could have otherwise gone, because then I started looking for more of these common bonds with other people. And it really opened up my heart and my empathy to people that are different to me. And that was such an important lesson in life. And that all came by Marvin Gaye.
Wow.
I'm gonna say.
See, there we go. We have this shared experience, which is very interesting.
Beautiful. And the way you said it was perfect.
Oh, and that shared experience is a listening experience. And that's one of the best parts about music, is there are so many different levels through which you can appreciate it. You can be a listener and stop there. Right. Yeah. And that's quite satisfying, just being a listener. I shouldn't even use that language. Being privileged enough to be a listener to music is fulfilling enough. But there are some of us that want to move forward and perform it. We want to compose it. So
right.
I'm gonna lay out my counter argument very quickly, because it's just going to be a foundation I'm going to point to later in the conversation. Okay. I'm going to say that music does not evoke emotions, but in order to make my point, I very much have to operationally define my terms, right? Okay. By music, I mean non-vocal music. That means it can have lyrics, which I think could evoke emotions, right, from a story, but that wouldn't be the music that's doing the evoking of emotions. So I want to remove them.
Okay.
And also because the voice, we are so evolutionarily attuned to it, our antenna is so sensitive to the human voice, I'd like to get rid of that. So essentially, chamber instrumental music, or what would be called art music, right? So to me, that's what music would have to be in order for this to make sense. And then emotions would have to be very specifically what people who study psychology of emotions call the garden variety emotions, which would be happiness, disgust, sadness, anger, the very specific basics that you could come up with, right? So, and then, and I'm gonna reveal, I'm gonna reveal my hand, so I'm gonna tip my hand early in the conversation and say that even with this definition, I think that even though I don't think I have a very good argument, even if somebody accepted how bad my argument is and that music does not evoke emotions, I think that my follow through would be music does something better. It causes an aesthetic response that's more vague than emotions, and it allows the individual to interpret what they're feeling. It does that through the process of tension and release. Now, this very concept of tension and release is something that I picked up from none other than Gerald Veasley through the exercises that I was given to come back with you, right? And they were like, when I say that Gerald Veasley gave me homework on bass, it wasn't like, Chris, I would like you to take this scale. Oh, no. Did I turn my bass down all the way? Oh, no. There it is. Okay. And I just want you to do the sequences in 3. Right? That would be like a normal bass teacher's bass homework. No. Gerald's bass homework was this. Contrast. I want you to write 4 exercises around that adjective. Low and high. I want you to write another 4 exercises around that. Tension and release. I want you to write some exercises around that concept. And you would just lob these basic concepts to me, right? And one of them was tension and release. And you wanted me to explore that in all these fun different ways, you know, through like the, you know, the note choice and going back and forth and the tension of the, you know, tonal centers and rhythms building tension and stuff. And then later when I went to study psychology, I realized that there are psychological theories of arts based on art creating tension and releasing it in clever ways that cause the aesthetic response. So that's, I'm going to leave it at that because I did way too much talking. I want more Gerald.
This is fascinating.
So that's my argument. But like I said, I really only make that argument to get to the good stuff, which is I would be interested, Mr. Veasley. Now, I would like to turn the tables on you. I would like for you to demonstrate, because I think that I'm so confident in my opinion that I think that you already agree with me. And I think that you can spend the next couple of minutes demonstrating what it is to create tension and release it. Could you do us a favor and maybe just through a melody line, through chords, through your creative process on electric bass, give some demonstrations of tension and release? And just so you don't feel alone, when after you, I'll do the same.
Oh, sure. This is very interesting because you know, hearing you reflect back to me what I taught you, I think some of those concepts, I think they're still valid in terms of what I wanted the outcome to be for you, which is to get in touch with the emotion. But by getting in touch with the emotion, you're also getting in touch with the capability of the instrument and your connection to it, right? So it's not that it's non-musical, it's that it's looking at your instrument a little differently and understanding the subtleties that an instrument can bring out. So rather than give you giving you just the pure kind of exercises, instead to think about what are you trying to get out of it? What are you trying to create in terms of emotion by understanding the power of these notes and their relationship one to another? So here's a little. So
that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Now, this is a question for you, someone who's studied this subject.
What you got?
The question is whether that tension and release, is it something that's hardwired to us as in us as listeners, or is that something that was created by composers? Is that imposed from the outside, right? So that then we start to understand this language in tension and release. In other words, is this something that is based on our own experience of how we listen to music, or does it have a kind of value in and of itself, that idea of tension and release?
Oh, Gerald, I have an answer for you.
Okay. I knew you would. That's why I asked.
I have an answer. I'm going to make it as short as possible because that answer touches on so many fun topics. Gerald, I need to have you back just to have more of these kinds of discussions. So the answer to your question is a little bit of everything. So if we consider that we are raised in a society where we are enculturated into how an octave is divided, right? And cultures divide it in different ways. We happen to divide it in 12 pieces and we temper it, you know. And that's where we get our scaled instruments and in the chromatic scale. So being raised in this environment over time, we understand what are, within that, we are born with an understanding of dissonance and consonance, regardless of how our culture divides up a octave, right? So we have a preference towards consonance and away from dissonance. So regardless of how you split up an octave is still the most consonant thing that you could strike, followed by a perfect fifth. You know, just follow the overtone series. Mm-hmm. That being said, you also add another layer has to do with the fact that some theories about why we enjoy music at all has to do with the fact that it mimics the human voice and follows the prosodic envelope of speaking. And because speech has its own way of creating tensions and releasing them, and prosodic envelope is just the technical term for the Charlie Brown teacher element of our talking, like right? You know what emotion is being communicated because of the prosody with which it's being spoken, regardless of the actual content. So those three factors kind of go into why we enjoy music. And to put a cherry on top of it, some people even theorize that we weren't evolved to enjoy music. It just happens to be like a leftover spandrel of other evolutionarily useful things, right? Steven Pinker has a theory calling it the auditory cheesecake, right? In the same sense that cheesecake doesn't grow on trees. We didn't evolve to like cheesecake, but it has all the ingredients that we did evolve to like fats and sweets.
Interesting.
So music, we didn't evolve to, it has no evolutionary purpose, but it has these things like prosody, like language does, tension and release, consonance, dissonance, rhythm, synchrony. It has all these ingredients that baked together form this thing that kind of is a psychology hack almost. So that doesn't directly answer your question, but the tension release component, I think, of those variables that I brought up relate most to our inherent preference for consonance. So, and then our cultures determine what the bounds of tension and release are, right? And by cultures, I mean, you and I, Gerald, being musically trained, we are in our own subculture where we can listen to Stravinsky, and what is dissonant to some people, we recognize as the consonant part.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because it's really, even dissonance is a matter of degree, right? It's
relative.
It's relative. And so if you grew up listening to Ornette Coleman, there's nothing about it that sounds dissonant. Or if you acculturation is not the right term. If you acclimate yourself to listening to a particular artist, that someone else might be grating, but to you, it might sound as natural and as consonant as possible. I remember when I was growing up, there was a good friend of mine, a guitar player, Jeffrey Johnson, and he would buy all these jazz records, and they were getting more and more interesting. So he brought over, I had jazz records growing up, like Miles Davis and some Thelonious Monk and stuff like that. And he would bring over like early Weather Report. It's like, wow, it's kind of cool. Then Nick Cannonball Adderley. Okay, wow, I grew up listening to Cannonball Adderley. Like, okay, this is great. But eventually he got to Albert Ayler, which was so intense. And so, Albert Ayler, the great saxophonist, who a lot of his vocabulary was like the most intense parts of the tenor saxophone, where to the uninitiated, it just sounds like noise and just this shrieking and all these harsh sounds. And it became our understanding between Jeffrey and myself that after all the albums, When he got to the Albert Ayler album, it was time for me to go home. That was his way of kicking me out the house, because his level of understanding consonance and dissonance was way above mine. So it is. So I totally get everything that you laid out in terms of us being acclimated, and of course, there's these cultural differences, and people who are, ethnomusicologists, they live in that world of contrasting different cultures and how sound sounds different in one culture to another, or is appreciated. But you've answered that question in such a beautiful way, talking about at least three different entry points to understanding, our relationship, what we consider tension and what we could consider release. I knew I would learn a lot from you today. This is good.
Oh, come on now. Come on. This is all an extension of you. This is all.
The prosody thing is very interesting to me too, because one exercise I used to have students do is play along with the radio, but play along with talk radio.
Yep.
Don't play along with the music, but play along with the news.
Yeah, and realize how limited the ranges that we
exactly. Right? Well, you start to understand that there is a rhythm to language.
Yes,
so we're always using this kind of language parallel with music. So what if we go back and we understand the prosody of language and incorporate it in our music? What happens, or the rhythm of it, right?
Yes.
Then it can inform how we think about music, and it can inform the power of space.
Okay, so let's. I love what you're doing with this. Okay, so Simon, I need you to back me up on this. So what you're dipping into right now, philosophically, is representation, right? It is the idea. It's the famous Magritte painting. This is not a pipe, right? It's not a pipe. It's a painting of a pipe, right? A pipe is the actual thing that you hold in your hand. What you're looking at is a painting. It is not actually a pipe. It's a representation of a pipe, right? So when you make emotional sounds on your instrument, they may evoke emotions in other people sympathetically, but it's because you're representing an emotion on your instrument, right? That is, to me, that is a non-musical trick that we get to play with.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So for instance, here's a real quick story, because this is my favorite example. Prince. Well, I mean, almost all of my favorite examples are going to begin with the word Prince. That said, when he did the solo for While My Guitar Gently Weeps on that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame jam, right? I don't know if it's the best guitar solo. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, just go to YouTube, best guitar solo ever, and that's the one that shows up. He starts the solo making his guitar sound like it's crying, right? And at least it does to me. Whether he did it on purpose or not, that's how it landed to me. And I just thought, like, yes, this is confirmation bias of why this guy is a musical genius.
Yeah.
But, and this is where I needed your backup, Simon. It's different. It's different to claim that music is causing emotion through notes, intention, and release than when you're trying to emulate and represent an emotion and kind of cause that emotion in your listener. Is that a fair distinction that I'm making?
Maybe for me, maybe it's reducible.
Okay.
I think that's the overarching goal, and then I count myself as a musician there for a second. Oh dear. But some people, I've written a song, so I can't be all bad. But some people then, combine all of that knowledge of the harmonic scales, of the scales and the harmony and that rhythm, to then try to represent something. But of course, in modern music, it's very often put through lyrics on top.
Yes.
Right. So that's that kind of tension release, and the overarching idea that we're going to try and write a love song or a dance song or whatever kind of song we're trying to evoke in people. I think that then goes to that level where they then put it over. For me personally, I do get exactly the same things that you're talking about in an overarching way, but only from a very few composers. Okay. Weirdly enough, right? For me, it's I'm so biased towards listening to a type of sound that I like, that it's really hard for me then to do that cultural acclamation, if you like. I've managed to do it maybe with Indian music, but I don't like other Asian music. I just like Indian music because I've listened a lot through my love of McLaughlin, then to other artists that he's introduced me to, through playing with Trilok Gurtu, etc., and then listening to the bands that he's played with, right? And so that is a beautiful way to expand my emotion in just music without lyrics, if you like. But it's very, very difficult to do, and I don't get the same thing. As soon as I hear that word that triggers me, then I'm in the emotion, and then I can draw out of the music all the emotion that I like.
See, to me, this falls in a category of music used like troubadours use it, right? And it's like the lyrics, the content of the lyrics is the main point, and the music is being used to provide the emotional kind of soundtrack to the story. And the fact that music can do the tension release, vague aesthetic response can be finely tuned with the lyrics, right? So with a little tension and release and the right kind of lyric, it's more this emotion than that other emotion kind of thing. But this raises, what were you going to say, Gerald?
Well, I was going to jump in and kind of touch on this representational aspect of music, or this question of, are you bringing a story to what you hear, or are you getting the composer's intent? So where is the emotion coming from?
Where I was going.
Is it coming from the person producing the sound or the person receiving the sound? And I think it's an element of both. And the people who live in this space are film composers.
Yes. Because we've all seen those clips of the same video with different audio soundtracks, and it gives a completely different vibe.
So they totally understand, this power of music to evoke the emotions that they want it to evoke at that moment. Of course, they have, in the same way that you described, lyrics is helping to kind of convey that emotion. They have images to help convey that emotion. So they've got that. But I think there's something else here at play, and I want to hear your perspective on it, which is that I also think we have these archetypes that we live with, that we understand sonically what they mean. For example, if I play this, everybody knows what that means because there's a cultural reference, right? But there's also this, and you would know this better than I as a psychologist, there's also something that happens in the base of our brain that interprets these low sounds as invoking like dread, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. So that's been proven. So I think so that's on the side of the producer conveying the emotion, tapping into the archetypal understanding of the listener. Now for us as players, there's a whole other thing that we haven't talked about, which was really one of the outcomes that I tried to impart on students, which is
before you get too deep into this, because we need to make one quick distinction between, as a performer, you can be a technician of music, or when you're improvising, you are straddling the role of composer performer while improvising. So I think that's important too, because everything we're saying about composers applies to improvisers. So I just want to make that distinction because I don't want it to get lost.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
So what was the point that you were going to?
You took me in another tangent right there with that.
Go ahead.
That's a huge one. I have to go back and talk about that at some point, because that idea of an improviser being involved in instantaneous composition,
instant composing.
I think it's also a matter of degree, right? Because sometimes you're relying on licks and tricks that you know already, and it's very rare that we're creating something that's totally fresh. But it's sort of in the combination of those things that create.
Oh my God, Gerald, I just remembered something that you told me from a lesson. I told you this talk was going to be peppered by these. This was the Gerald Veasley way. Hold on a second. I'm going to solo myself for this. This is going to be fun. Hold on one second. When I was a student of Gerald Veasley's, He wanted me so badly to get out of the habit of playing around chords. And so just as a quick demonstration, so if a chord progression, like a 2-5-1, right? So like something supernatural and easy to do is to just outline the chords, right? Well, there's only so far you can get with that without it just sounding like perpetual exercises. Right? Sure, it sounds good, but it's real inside. And Gerald was trying to break Maute out of the inside. Literally, this is what you told me, Gerald. Pretend pretend that the chords were written around whatever you decide to play. You actually had me flip it. It was like I wasn't playing to chords. The chords weren't there for me to play over. My solo came first, but the notes that I played were more important than the chords, and they were just there to support what I wanted to do. You were talking me into being so headstrong about my intent with melodic note choice that it was just like chords be damned. So I just wanted to tell that story as a demonstration of like, like when you're improvising, you get to flip the script between creating the being boxed in by the chord you're playing over versus an attitude of I'm going to be expressive and the chords just happen to be there to make me sound better. And it is, and those are like, I'm paraphrasing because I can't think of the exact words, but that is embedded in my memory forever. Yeah,
that's fascinating because I still feel that way. That we should think of the chords as the accompaniment, right? Yeah. And that I think you said I don't know if you brought up, it was you, Simon, that brought up the concept of reduction. It's like the more I play, the more I'm trying to reduce things down to the most simple core elements of what music means to me. And where I am now is that there's only melody.
Yes.
There's only melody. Not everything else is a construct. That's where I'm at. That's not something for everybody. That's for me. That I want to be aware that a bass line is a melody. That I hear when I hear drums playing, it's a melody over 5 or 6 different instruments. And that all of it is melody. And so when I hear, in this frame of thinking, don't take this literally, but in this framework, there's no such thing as a chord.
Yes. Yes. That's very much, that was the theme you were trying to, and it was tough. That's tough to wrap your head around when you're so entrained, right? Getting anybody to think outside the box about anything is difficult. But like, I remember that was one of those moments where like, I was struggling. I was like, I don't get it, man. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, a lot of those things too are to liberate us, yes. From the way we typically think. And there's another goal too, and this is, I have to say this because if your viewers don't get anything else from this conversation, I want them to get this understanding, is that I have the mind of a 5-year-old. Meaning, when I'm playing, the mind of my 5-year-old mind, it wants to engage in everything I see. I'm playing the bass, but I'm looking at the pictures on the wall. I'm looking at, if it's a club, the drinks on the table. I'm thinking about back home, did I leave the iron on? I'm thinking about, am I being impressive as a musician? I'm thinking about, am I going to get a parking ticket when I leave? There are so many things that my 5-year-old mind wants to think about and be absorbed in, away from the music. It wants to pull me away from this act of making music, which is something that I love, and it's the most important thing to me in terms of what I can do with, to express myself in this world. But yet I have a mind that wants to pull me away from it. So how do I resolve that? I resolve it with these kind of hacks, as you call them. these stories. Because if I ask you to play, and I don't know if we talked in this before, if I ask you to play, 251 again. Just in that few seconds, I can think about several things. Am my hands in the right place? How does it sound? Are these guys judging me? Does it feel okay? It sounds a little bit out of tune. There are all these judgments that the 5-year-old mind wants to like hang on to. And meanwhile, I've missed the experience of making music. So one of my techniques, or one of my strategies, is to think about things that are outside of the performative or the technical aspect of the music and go straight for the meaning. So in going straight for the meaning, it does not indicate that that meaning is the exact interpretation that everybody should have, or that I should even have for all time. It's really a pathway away from being distracted. Yeah, reining in the 5-year-old mind. So instead of playing this, just these 3 chords and judging it, I might think for a second, I might imagine that I love like Bible stories. Like I think about David. This just came to me this moment.
Perfect.
How David and King Saul was a very troubled person because he was so insecure about his own worth. And he had a really troubled spirit. And this young future King David, it says that he was very skilled and that he could play to kind of soothe the troubled soul. You know, maybe he was troubled. Maybe he had a little touch of mental illness. Who knows? But the music, back to music and emotion. So what if I thought about playing these 3 chords is not just I'm performing for you, but that I'm David.
And tell us
and
the story.
This has to actually move someone who's troubled. Now there, I released myself from thinking about how well I was doing and all these other things, and thinking about my fingers and thinking about this little story, and kind of taking myself off of the seat of judgment. Another thing that I think about often in terms of this judgment is that when we're playing and we're judging what we're playing, at that moment we've stopped playing. Right? And so we want to do both. We want to play, we want to make music, and we want to judge it. We want to measure how good it is. And so our mind is going back and forth. Oh, that sucked. That was pretty good. That's really good. Wow, I didn't know I could do that. Oh, you're horrible. Right? So it's almost like a mental stock market that's happening in real time. You're measuring your worth as a musician. And meanwhile, nobody's taking care of the music. So often these kind of frames or stories or other kind of perspectives, these hacks, it's a way to get out of the stock market of evaluating yourself and just going for the meaning. Now you're free. And the big takeaway is that when you're immersed in your story, it's beyond judgment, even your own.
That's perfect. What I like about that is it takes you, it's a non-musical way of getting you into a musical place. It's using creative visualization about not necessarily a musical thing. Like it's a story, right? You're choosing a biblical story, but any kind of story. The fact that and here's another quick thing. I told you this was going to be peppered with these kinds of nostalgic things. You talking about playing a gig and seeing drinks on tables and seeing pictures on walls reminds me of another exercise that you gave me, which was to play the lights. We had drop ceilings in our lesson rooms, and they had those rectangular fluorescent lights. And you were like, look at that light. And I want you to follow the line of the outside of that light and play the corners. That was one of your exercises for me, Gerald, to play the lights. But to your point, it was for the purposes of getting me out of my head.
Yeah.
I think that that's when you communicate the best. I consider it tapping into the wavelength. When you tapped into the music wavelength, it's flowing through you in a way that you can communicate laser sharp. The music is being taken care of. You've trimmed all the fat. You're telling the best story, and everybody is getting it. In those moments, those are the moments I chase as a musician. The ability to tap that wavelength, to not let the 5-year-old distract me from being centered, because you need to be centered to tap that wavelength, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and if this language sounds familiar, it should, man. This is you're reaping the benefits of hearing yourself come at you from a previous student.
I'm going to use that. I love that idea of tapping the wavelength, because it is. I remember a friend of mine. He talked about the Greek word ecstasis.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know, when you're in that zone until you realize you were in the zone. and then it's broken.
It's the whole flow experience, right?
Right. But there are moments when it's extended and you're out of yourself and you're not aware of anything. And once you've ever felt that, you really want to get back to that place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how you get there or how you can sustain it. But with what you talk about wavelength, that's how I receive that. Like, there are these moments where you are just so connected with the music that there's a lack of awareness or there's a lack of a separation from the music.
Peak flow moments.
You and the music, those are
experiences.
Say it again.
Plateau and peak flow experiences.
Peak flow experiences, exactly. That's what it is. And you know, in those peak flow experiences, you lose track of time. You don't know. And then if somebody taps you on the shoulder and they said, "Man, that was awesome," you're like, "What? What happened?
Where am I? Who am I?"
But but it's elusive, right? Like, how do you get there? I haven't figured that out. But it's a lot of it is not in the reaching and the trying. It's in the opposite of trying.
It's letting go, because it's natural, right? It feels like it's when the planets align, but it has more to do with, and sometimes it does have to do with the planets aligning, right? But I think for me at least, it has more to do with maintaining my center, being excited, not so excited that I'm all over the place, but I'm harnessing my excitement for like laser sharp focus. Like, that's when you're tapping the wavelength. That's when I'm tapping the wavelength.
Tapping the wavelength. I love this.
May I suggest something a little different for this kind of thing, which is that perhaps it's something to do with muscle memory, and therefore the dedication, diligence, and practice that we talked about early in those 10,000 hours. Maybe it's more to do with trusting that muscle memory, that you've been there and you're feeling your way through it just by the sensations coming from not the instrument, maybe inside you, maybe your muscles themselves.
So that brings up an interesting question, Gerald, because muscle memory, and we're gonna have to wrap it up soon, but let's unpack this just a little bit. Muscle memory is both a friend and an enemy. The muscle memory, right? The muscle memory that you learn from your 10,000 hours allows you to mindlessly, like, you know, burn through scales, you know, like just like knowing where these notes are naturally, just by doing all your exercises. What you don't want is to let your muscle memory get in the way, so that when you're soloing, instead of having like tasty note choice, you're stuck in your, world, right? Where your muscle memory is just taking over, where you could just get away with a
I like that.
Right?
I specifically wanted to point this to jazz, because I hear, I'm a bad jazz musician. Okay, there's no doubt about it. I'm like that. And what I do is I do exactly the sins that Christopher's already pointed out, because, of course, I sit there and I don't have this imagination on top, because I feel my technique isn't good enough to be able to allow me to express what's in my head. It's expressing what's in my fingers, and that's that contrast I'd like you to talk about a little in jazz.
Well, I think that's I think that's natural. Now, I'm not as much of a jazz player as Gerald was, but I remember in my arc, and I'll leave it at this, there comes a time when you kind of need it to be very handsy to get over it. Just get over it. Yes, you can do this. You can do it at different tempos. You can do it in different keys. You can do it in ballads. You can do it in fast bebop. You can do it. Now stop doing it. But there has to be a point where you're fleshing it out. And then it's like, okay, I got that. Now it's a trick in my bag of phrasing instead of being a main part of my solo. At least that's how I experience it. What about you, Gerald?
I agree with that. I agree that there's this time where you have to put in that time to build the muscle memory so that you can execute those things that you want to. I remember I was involved in a project that was where Ornette Coleman was actually the producer of this singer. So I didn't play in Ornette Coleman's band, but I played in this project that he oversaw, and it was really fascinating to learn from him because he was always thinking different. So I watched him rehearse his band, Primetime Band, and at one point he stopped the musicians and he said, he talked to the guitar players. He said, "Why did you play that?" "Well, that was just what I heard at the time." He said, "Really?" He said, "Was that a musical idea or Fred idea?" Because he understood this concept of muscle memory will sometimes fool you to think that you're creating these musical ideas when it's really your hands, the patterns that they're used to doing. So it got his musicians at that moment to take more control over the music, to let the music come from here rather than what you can do, right? Which I thought was a powerful kind of lesson for me in terms, because I had thought about that too. Like, how do you conquer this this idea of being handsy, or I love this, but it is to understanding where the music really emanates from. Victor Wooten puts it another way. He says, "Don't play the instrument, play the music."
There you go.
Which is, which is powerful, right? It's direct. Don't play the instrument, play the music. So even, what does that mean? Like, if you're a musician who's never tried, you don't get an idea at all of what that means. But if you struggle with what we're talking about right now, you totally get it. And it's a way to kind of, in the same way that I've talked to students and peers about this, like flipping things, that Victor Wooten flip is really, really powerful. Don't play the instrument at all. Play the music. And I've even done things, even like all these other hacks, like if I'm struggling with my technique, I said, well, why is that? Like, how is it possible? Because if I can play I can imagine a wonderful execution, then why is the instrument in the way? So then I reverse it to think, well, the instrument's not there.
Yeah.
What does the music sound like if it's really, really effortless? Like the instrument's not there. And do we have a couple more minutes?
Above us, right?
Can we do one more thing? Here's a thing. I don't know how folks who are listening. I've done this at the Bass Boot Camp, and we can do it together.
That's right.
Everyone, right now, for the next 20 seconds or so, think of the hardest piece of music that you've had to play, something that's really tricky to play, and it just tricks you up every time, right? It might be, I'm not going to say what it is, but I know what mine is. You guys got yours?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now together, let's start. And then when you make a mistake, put your hand up. But you're not going to play it. You're just going to imagine it. That's good. All right, everybody start.
It's hard to make a mistake in my head. Right there.
Yeah. That was right there for me too. Yeah. So how is that even freaking possible? That we can make a mistake in our head?
Because did we practice that mistake?
Well, my belief is that sometimes we are reinforcing mistakes.
Okay.
See, the reason we're talking about practicing slowly because when we are playing, practicing and playing slowly, is because everything that we do on our instrument is a reinforcer. The mind doesn't know the difference between what you intend to do and what was a mistake. It's always learning. So when you play something, let's call it sloppily, that you didn't intend to do, brain's like, I got it. That muscle memory, that whole system's thinking like, cool, let's do it again. And that's why it's tougher sometimes to unlearn than to learn, because everything you're doing, is reinforcing. So the reason, and it's one of the hardest things to get students to do, is slow down.
Yes.
So you're only reinforcing the things that you want to put into your muscle memory. Otherwise, I mean, I know there are things that I'm still trying to unlearn from years and years ago, from going too fast, because my mind is always learning. It's always creating those pathways, right? And building new synaptic connections. Yeah. And it thinks it's good.
Yeah. I mean,
that point was a huge key for me, being a guitar player and, soloing a lot. Of course, people rely on you to solo, of course. Not that it's not, but in the style of music I was playing. And that was absolutely the key, from being somebody who was trying too hard to somebody who tried exactly the right amount. And that was to imagine what I was going to play before I actually played it, to have a good idea of what was going to come out of my fingers before I played it, to have the imagination, even to the point in improvisation. Maybe you could just address this, because as a jazz player, this is the hardest thing to do, of course, is to improvise in jazz music, and yet it's the bread and butter of that genre, I suppose, in some ways. The hardest thing was, I would have these ideas, and of course it was relatively easy just then to play them, but that still didn't seem to hit the spot. It was almost like I had to forget that idea, then think of something else in that moment, and then I could play that, and then I was somewhere I didn't know. And that became exciting. That became, much more creative for me, in a way of liberating a whole side of music in my brain that I was scared to access, almost, I'd say. What do you think of that in jazz music?
Well, I that's I can say so much about that. First of all, let's just deal with the satisfaction, right? Because one of the tricky things in playing is that, again, we're always judging, right? So judging how good our jazz is, right? And deciding, and like, what feels good and what doesn't feel good. It's tough to figure out what to do with that. But when we go back to the initial part of the conversation about the language comparison, it's like this. When we first learn a foreign language, like Spanish, we're satisfied with hola, ¿cómo estás? Right? Right? We're satisfied with that. It feels good. Like when I was in middle school, that was great, because we're all saying it to each other. But the satisfaction from that does not last long, because you understand that there's so much more you want to say. And this is where we get frustrated in learning jazz, because we might learn a few things that are related to playing using either a chord playing over a chord progression, or playing using a scale, and it feels satisfying because it's new, right? But after a while, when you've been doing that for a while, now you just start to judge. Well, I suck. It's not that you suck. It's that you have to expand your vocabulary, right? Now, the idea of expanding your vocabulary, when you grow up in Spain or Colombia, right? It's natural to expand your vocabulary. When you're flying in and you get dropped off in Colombia, it's much tougher to expand your vocabulary. So you stand around saying, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Dónde está el baño? Where's the bathroom? That's super important, right? So the problem is not that we're not playing the right things as early improvisers, is that we don't know enough of the things to play. We haven't built our vocabulary. So we're really right in the place where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Right
Because
where we're supposed to be until we build our vocabulary.
but I can't help but think of those like, come on, Gerald. Thinking of like, being in music school when you're young and either seeing cats like this or being one of those cats where like as soon as you figured something out that was like flashy, like a something like that on bass, or like, like or even in walking, like that little triplet thing. As soon as you get it, you think it belongs everywhere, right? It is the hola, como esta of music. It's just like, what song? Am I playing a ballad? Oh, am I playing a fast song? Is this a bossa nova? Oh, what kind of rock and roll? Like, no matter what, that riff finds its way in there.
So this is the hack for you, especially, or people like you who are very diligent, but their diligence works against them because you learn it so well that then you want to unlearn it. Instead, what you do is you take that and you expand it. So, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there, I did it on the first beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. But learn it on the second beat. Right. Yep. So then you take whatever it is that you're bored with, and start to develop it further. Because here's what's important. I would never want to erase from you what already comes natural. Why would you throw it away? It comes natural. It's in your muscle memory. What you really want to do is expand on it. So instead of just root to root, what about third to third? What about fifth to fifth? So now you see that it's really not a trap. It's actually it's an entry point that then you can expand on, right?
But you need to as soon as you break it out of, it's just a da-da-da-da. And then when you recognize it as that, then it's just to your point, you don't even need to land on the same note that you started with an octave. You could be like, something like that, right? Like I haven't played a walked a bass line in forever, so please forgive.
No, but it's cool because right there you were liberated. We start off the conversation saying, "Oh man, this is a drag because I keep doing this over and over," and then all of a sudden you say, "Well, wait, there's lots of ways that I can do it."
Yeah.
So, what's the word? What I'm looking for, not the contradiction, the irony, or the paradox.
Yes.
Is that the way to get away from playing patterns is playing more patterns and understanding your patterns, yes. Right? And figuring out how to displace the patterns, right? And what notes you can take out and what chord tones you can use. So it's not the pattern that's the enemy. It's being not as inventive about how you use the pattern.
And I want to have another conversation with you because we need to start wrapping this up, but I want to have a separate conversation. I want to bring you back, Gerald, because this is just so fun. I can't even stand it. I could talk for hours, but we all have things to do.
I love it. So thank you for inviting me. This is awesome. It's giving me a lot to think about.
Could I just ask one further question? Would that be allowed?
Yes. Well,
I know we're running over.
Before you do, I want to touch on that one last thing. I would love to have an extended discussion with you, Gerald, about the fact that I'm not a full-time musician. I think has provided a weird insight into how I practice and the things that I'm 49, and I feel like I'm a better bass player now than I've ever been. And I'm just now discovering things in the past year that they are watershed moments. They are those aha moments like I used to have in lessons with you. But I think it's because because I'm not a full-time musician and because I have a full-time and part-time job and a family and stuff. When I approach practicing, it's a very different method than the diligence of music school. And I think because of that, sometimes I forget things that I was working on. So I approach it completely fresh because I have no choice. You know what I mean? And instead of seeing it as a bad thing, I see it as a good thing. But without unpacking that too much, I do want to kind of plant that as a seed for a future conversation. Simon, what were you going to say?
Well, this was a separate issue, another question really to do with your career as such, and that is two things. When you look back, could you just maybe highlight a couple of the moments which stick out to you? What are the things that have been important to you as a musician, and how would they inspire future musicians maybe? And then the other thing was just pressure. When you go on stage, I saw you playing in a very large concert hall to a lot of people, and the pressure must be huge. Some people that are young musicians thrive to be a star or on stage performing and entertaining people. And yet, obviously, there's lots of pitfalls along the way. And could you just talk to how you may deal with that, or what it's been like for you?
Yeah, I'll take the second question first, because what I try to do is I try to take my practice room with me, right? Just like the three of us right now, we're in our music rooms, and it's probably the most comfortable place. So mentally, I just take that with me. Instead of being in a stadium, so I use a lot of, my hacks are all about tapping into imagination, right? So it's like, and here's the other part of it. You can also, and I need to bring this back, I forgot about this hack. You can also bring the stadium into your practice space, right? So, because the practice space can be very isolated and dry, and you don't feel like, you can feel unmotivated, or what is it all about? But imagine if it's not a practice space, but it's actually a performance space for the most important audience, yourself. Right? And that you're putting your heart and soul into it in your practice room. And then when you're on stage, instead of it being this highly tense moment to play in front of thousands of people where you have to prove yourself, no, you're just at home in your space. I reversed it. And the other thing that I do is I'll say, well, if I'm thinking so much about how I'm looking or how I'm coming off, I'll say, well, what if I was invisible? Well, would I care about any of this? And it all of a sudden, I become actually even more entertaining because I'm not self-conscious. Now I'm having fun, and if people can feel it, and I'm not thinking about failing or succeeding because I'm invisible. So I mean, this is really, I hope this is meaningful. I hope it don't sound too goofy, but these are the things that kind of work for me because of Simon's, the pressure aspect of it is real, and it doesn't even have to be thousands of people in an audience. It could be an audience of 3 people, and you can sometimes feel even more intense pressure. So you need to have all of these, strategies.
Yeah.
What was the first part of the question? It was about, do we have time to share this story?
What time is
please.
Yeah, I just don't want to take up too much of your time, Gerald. We're here as long as you'd like.
Okay. I'll share this with you, which is, as you mentioned, I worked with Joe Zawinul for about 7.5 years. And that was just a fantastic time recording with him and touring with him and learning so much. But the kind of conversation that we're having about music, those were kind of conversations I wanted to have with Zawinul about, watching him play a chord, and what are you thinking about when you're playing that chord? Or how do you come up with that song? Or, all those kinds of questions, so that I can improve as a player and understand music on a deeper level, touring with somebody who was not just a jazz master, but really a genius. I mean, Zawinul was someone who I never saw him stumble over reading a piece of music. So in terms of just musicianship, he had that down because, I mean, he grew up in Austria in a very strict kind of musical institute where you were, you had to play everything perfectly, and you had to read perfectly and do all those things. And he had perfect pitch. And so he was the musician's musician. and he wrote some symphonic pieces, and he would include us in some of these performances. And he could hear one wrong note in an 80-piece orchestra. He could stop the whole orchestra because he could hear one instrument being a half step off, and he would know what the instrument was and where it was. So I really craved learning more about music from this person who was just a fantastic musician. But what did he want to talk about all the time? He wanted to, Gerald, let me tell you about life. He wanted to talk about life. I want to learn about music. He wants to talk about life. So, you know, and being an older musician myself now, I understand that emphasis to share about life, right? Because it's so much richer. Grover was the same way. Grover Washington, he was really all about like the life that you're making and for your family and what all that means. But when you're a young musician, man, you just want to know how to play better, how to be, you know, how to really get this music.
What are you doing over dominant chords?
Exactly. That's what you want.
How do you address an altered chord? What are you doing?
Exactly, all of that, right? And I would ask him questions like that. Like, when you play that chord, what do you think about soloing? You go, I don't think about that stuff. It's like, what?
Okay, so
just being dismissive. But really, in reality, he didn't think about that stuff. He was so beyond that stuff.
Fantastic.
And it was really, I won't say it was an insult to ask him about it, but here's what happened. After 7.5 years of that, the reason I left Zawinul's band was because I wasn't growing. I left because I felt stilted. You know, now I'm starting to make my own solo records, and I'm like, man, this is kind of holding me back. I can't see that I'm growing at all. And then I come back home and I'm playing with musicians, and I look over at the bandstand at a piano player, and I'm looking at him saying, damn, that's not Zawinul anymore. And then we're playing songs, and I'm like, wow, these are not Zawinul songs. These are just songs. And then I kind of get a little bit deflated, like, you're like, what did I do? But also I'm monitoring like how it feels to play. And I realized that my playing in those situations now is at another level. Like, I have this kind of understanding of music that where I'm free, and, you know, I'm playing, and it's like super cool, and I don't even know where it's coming from. But what was happening was that when I was with him, I was learning all along. I was learning the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't understand it or appreciate it. Mm. So the biggest career reflection is to understand those moments, like, right, to appreciate those moments while they're happening instead of appreciating them when they're in the rearview mirror. Like this moment that we're in right now, right? To appreciate it as a real moment. And then what I took from that was then when I looked on the bandstand at the piano player, instead of judging him for not being Zawinul, I look at it and say, what is this moment of asking of me now?
Perfect. What
is the brilliance of this individual asking me to pay attention to now? What is he or she offering to the world that I don't want to miss?
Yeah, it's a different ingredient to this recipe, right?
Yeah.
I like it.
So it's less of a career reflection and more about maturing and understanding the power of those moments and how they're singular. You don't want to miss them.
Yeah, and just to say, there's two things. I was stunned by Zawinul because I hadn't seen him before. So to see someone live like that, his phrasing just really was amazing. That's what I noticed most about that evening, and how loud he played. That was just like, oh my goodness! I don't think this old building is going to stand this for 2 hours. You know what I mean? But he was amazing, absolutely, and you know, so I was thrilled to get to see you guys play. It was a real honor, and certainly a life memory. So, and that's something that those musicians you can get from that moment. So even if it's not as Alan, as you're saying, there's something that you can do to improve that moment, that you can add in to improve that moment. and whoever it is, or give them a space to improve the moment, right? So being bass players, of course, you must be used to stepping back in order to give other people the limelight, rather than always seeking it like a guitarist would. But anyway, that's another story. So
no, that's important. Yeah,
I think so.
That's very important, because what you're bringing out, Simus, is that, whether you're serving or whether you're stepping out, whatever your role is, you don't want to miss it, because that's where your life is, right? Your life is happening right then and there, right? It's not, that it's like, even when I'm talking about Zavano, it's like I'm feeling the nostalgic, the missing of him, and the missing all my bandmates over those years, and coming to London to play in front of folks like you, or going around the world. Those are in the rearview mirror. And now this conversation right now is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that life before, it almost doesn't exist. The only life I know right now is this life right here. This is real life right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway,
the challenge is to be present. The challenge is to be present for the right now moments.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Before they're gone,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's good for any career. I mean, obviously, being a musician who has toured, I mean, you have a lot more flags in the sand to point to from your career about, crazy, awesome things that have happened. But regardless, I think that, it's a life lesson. Being present for the moments is, life is what happens between making plans. It's like that concept, right?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. And, I didn't talk much about Grover during this conversation, but Grover had this unique, he was very complex, because he was the most humble person you'd ever want to meet. Like he, in our jazz world, he was, really a star. I mean, somebody who, we toured with tour buses and the whole thing. And, it was, I'm not going to say it was glamorous, but it was like, for jazz musicians, it was like on a really, on a cool level, and playing big venues and all of that. But he was someone that was never talked much about himself, and was fun to be around. But another side of him was fiercely serious about the music. So, I think we all have this competitive nature, or we can have a competitive nature as musicians, but it's how you channel it, right? And that's one of the things I learned from Grover. He would never channel it to outplay someone else.
Yes.
It was more about channeling it to set the bar higher, right?
Yes.
To set, okay, we're going to set this. Come on, let's go. We're going to hit it hard. We're going to play, we're going to dig deep.
Let's all bring
it. So a perfect example of this is, he was also a great mentor to young musicians. And so often we might go into a town like Tampa or Clearwater or, St. Louis, and there'd be a young musician on the side of the stage, like a 13-year-old kid fingering his alto. It's like, okay, this kid is going to sit in on the last song. It's like, okay. So the first time you see it's like, and are we going to bring up somebody that's really special? Here's so-and-so from your hometown. Little kid walks in. He's a little nervous, and he's got his best suit on. And he goes up to the microphone. And the audience, of course, they're soaking it all in, like, yay, and then the song starts, and then, we play, and then it's time for solos. So Grover lets the kid take the first solo, and he's playing, he's been practicing all year, right?
Oh,
so solo, it's a nice solo.
He's got blisters on his lips.
It's nice. It's cute and it's cool. It's a little kid, right? And everybody's, oh, wow. And then Grover takes his solo, and he acts like he's standing next to John Coltrane. He just goes full out, like it's like Michael Jordan, like dunking on a little kid, like. But then what he would do is then he would give it back to the kid, And now the kid is like, really like, okay, oh, this is real. So, but then what I understood was that it wasn't competition. He was setting a standard. Like, no, this space up here on this bandstand, this is not a playground, right? This is a war zone. It's like, you know, like this is serious. And we're going to take this seriously. And it didn't mean he didn't have love for the kid. It didn't mean anything competitive. But that's the kind of person he was. And back to our earlier conversation, he would never, ever use language. He would always demonstrate, even rehearsals. The most instruction he would ever give to the band when we would screw something up is, let's try it again. That's it.
And that's as rough as it ever got. Every time you said that, you were shaking.
You figure out where you messed up.
You go to your room and think about what you did, right?
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that kind of complexity around the issue of competition, because for a long time I misunderstood it. That music is this place where there's never any competition. But I think it's more nuanced. It's like the competition is to serve the music.
Yes.
It's not to take you to a higher level, but to take music to a higher level.
The competition is, so there's two levels for me, competition and music, right? We don't ever want to think of music as athletics, right? Like, even though it's fun to watch those, like, you know, people playing Flight of the Bumblebee to a metronome super fast. I ain't going to deny that is some fun stuff to watch. Not going to lie. That aside, the competitive part for me is more individualistic, because music is a craft that you never want to be as good at, right? Like, you never want to achieve the goals that you have for yourself in this craft, because then, you know, once you've achieved it, then it's not aspirational, it's destinational. You've reached your destination. Now what? I'd rather that destination to always be the carrot in front of me that I'm never reaching, right? So I'm always competitive with myself,
right,
about, you know, being better than I was yesterday. But then the group competitiveness that you were talking about, it's the competition to transcend from my perspective. So, and by that I mean transcend the me you dichotomy. It's like, we as the musician, as the group of musicians that are meant to be in sync in a way that we are one organism, we need to compete to transcend, so that we can have that cohesiveness, so that we can be a gestalt, so that we can a greater than the sum of our parts kind of experience. That's
a beautiful way to characterize it.
That from what you were saying.
I love that. I love that. Man, this has been phenomenal. I'm sorry.
Just one quick comment on that, which is, it's interesting because exactly what you said, Grover Washington did. I don't know how many years ago, but I'm guessing it's a fair number. Exactly what he did. That's now become all the rage for the bands to do that, is to get fans up that have spent a lot of hours trying to learn whatever, and do the thing, and to come up, and that's the rage, right? And to hear that somebody as good as Grover Washington was doing that out of a genuine place, right, to improve the future generations or give inspiration to everybody. Anybody can get up there with Grover Washington. Well, that means I can do it, surely. That's amazing to hear that he was doing it that long ago, and shows to what a great talented, what a great mind. What a great mind he must have been.
Back to the musical
he was very generous. And I think that generosity came out of the understanding of not overestimating who he was, and not underestimating, but appreciating, you know, what he had been given, and then giving his all back to it. When he passed away, we were all over at his house, and his mom had come up from, where did she live? She lived in, I want to say Memphis. She came up, and she had a photo album. And I'm looking through the photo album of Grover as a kid. And it's so cool, because there's this one picture, I can see it right now. His brother was a really good drummer, is a good drummer. And he had another brother that played the organ and the piano, who actually had passed away before Grover. But there's a picture of the three of them in the living room with their instruments. And there's Grover with his alto saxophone in his best suit, right? Standing there. And I thought, okay, he never forgot where he came from. So,
Yeah.
of course, he's going to pay it forward to these other little kids in their best suits, because everybody has to start somewhere. I think he really never lost sight of that.
Yeah, that inspiration is the key. That's what keeps me going anyway. Listening to great players like yourself, and as guitar players, Greg Howe when he comes on, listening to those players and just going, oh yeah, I can do some of what he does. Maybe if it's 5%, maybe, and that's enough. Because that's enough for me. I'm just gonna keep on playing, and maybe I'll get 6%. That would be cool. You know what I mean? I've been learning some Greg Howe songs, and oh my goodness,
Inspiration.
new techniques and new everything for me. And I'm like, I know I didn't do this when I was 18. Well, I mean 18, whatever, 23. But there we go.
All right.
So it's been a pleasure to meet you. So thank you very much. Just before we finish up, and
So
Christopher,
Simon, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove you from the broadcast for no other purpose than for this last little bit. So
lovely.
So Simon, I'm going to
thank you all.
No problem.
Great to meet you, Simon. Continue.
Yeah.
So keep hanging out, even though I'm going to remove you from the. You're still going to be in the house.
I actually have another question for Gerald later.
Okay, yeah, for Bradford. So Gerald, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity. We were just talking about being in the moment. We were talking about the importance of music. We are restricted, unfortunately, that we can't play in sync or simultaneously through this platform, but I would be beating myself senseless, punishing if I didn't take advantage of this opportunity to, through music, play with you how happy I am that I got a chance to talk to you, how sad I am that the conversation is over, how filled with emotion I am to just be able to reconnect with you. So instead, since we can't play at the same time, I'm going to suggest that we just trade some phrases back and forth. Conversation just with musical phrases. And I think that would be a really nice way to wrap this up.
I love that.
Fair?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Gerald.
Thank you, Chris.
Hold
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you so much, man. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been FLAVORTOOTH. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be talking to Greg Howe. Simon, let me get you back in here. There we go. And so 2 weeks, I'm going to end the broadcast. You guys hang out. We'll wrap this up, chew the fat just for a couple more minutes. And thank you, everybody. Gerald, this has been so fun. I can't even stand it.
I learned so much tonight, and it's given me inspiration to just do more and to play more and to teach more and just to continue to enjoy moments like these. And great to meet you, Simon. Great questions, great energy. Much love to you both.
And to you.
Okay, let me see if I can wait. I'm professional enough to actually play the same video out that I played in. Here we go. Professional. This is professional.